we'll give you a summary of the key findings and of the key patterns that we have identified with regards to the consumers and how they make decisions or how they think they make decisions. But hopefully these 5 points will also help you with your work if you'd like to engage the audience and if you'd like to engage your customers with visual entertainment. So let me begin. Well, first and foremost, our first key takeaway is to complicate in order to simplify. And what we mean by that is that the decision-making of choosing the right visual entertainment is really complex. As Julia pointed out, sometimes it's perceived as the tyranny of choice. And navigating this tyranny of choice is never easy. But what we suggest to everyone involved in making recommendations to people is to really make a combination of all the factors that can impact this really difficult and complex decision making. And what I mean by that is, for instance, BFI is lucky to have Ian, who can make different iterations of all the factors that can influence the decision making, which can be one's personality, one's mood, the company one is with, the weather, very important, and also some demographic factors. But instead of me talking, let me just tell you one quote from one of our participants who was telling me, well, Eszter, when I'm depressed and when I'm alone and when it's rainy outside, all I want to do is just to watch an Outlander. All I want is to have Outlander come up on my screen, and I just want to immerse myself in that one. However, if I am depressed, really, really sad, and it's sunny outside, and I happen to be with my boyfriend, then God save me from Outlander, please show me something like Back to the Future. And so what I like to highlight is that oftentimes we hear different messages market to mindsets, or talk to different mindsets, talk to different personalities. But what we see is that if you really want to navigate the tyranny of choice, then you really have to make this statistical interaction and iteration up front in order to simplify the decision making for your customer. And it's worth it, as we have heard from our participants. So that's number one. Number two, Julia mentioned that one of the key objectives of this study is to discover and uncover the different need states that drive decision-making above and beyond this umbrella tyranny of choice. And again, if we want to give you one piece of advice, then it would be, when in doubt, fall back on the pyramid of needs. And I think everybody knows the pyramid of needs. It's very, very famous. Yes, it's been challenged a couple of times, but it still states that human needs basically boil down to having food, having a little bit of love, having some self-esteem, having security, and for some people also about changing the world. Of course, it's much more nuanced in people's head, but if you really are struggling, then just focus on these needs. And again, instead of me talking around these, let me just rely on one of the quotes from one of our participants. So for instance, she is a lady, she's around 38, she's 38, she's single, and she really feels lonely most of the time, as it becomes clear from the conversations we had with her. And so she was telling us that the reason she really likes watching the likes of Bridget Jones is because she's feeling loved. And that's one of the basic needs that everybody needs. And it's just so simple as that. And even if someone expresses this need in a much more complicated language, it just boils down to this particular need. How do we know that films also trigger and are linked with the need state of self-actualization or changing the world? It's because some of our participants told us that the reason they chose Coco Chanel, or films like that, is because they wanted to understand all the hardship and all the obstacles that these successful women had to go through in order to achieve their dreams. So there you go. If you want to identify the need states, and if you don't have time to delve into all the 475 need states, which I've just made up, and don't rely on me because I have my quantitative colleague talk about numbers, then just always think about this pyramid of needs, which boils down to 6 key needs, which are, again, having food, having some love, having security, having some good self-esteem, and maybe also some intention of changing the world. The third point we'd like to share is be bold about Britishness. And what we mean by that is that when we talk about genres, and if you'd like to engage the audience by mentioning what sort of genre a particular film or visual entertainment is, then what you might assume is that consumers talk about 5 or 6 genres and really oversimplify this in their head. But interestingly, it's not the case. And what's more interesting from the point of view of, so to say, Britishness, is that not only do they talk about British film as sort of an umbrella term, but they also talk about British drama, or they also talk about British period drama, or they talk about British psychological thrillers. So what we're trying to say is that sometimes it's really, really difficult to talk about details in a very specific manner. However, the more precise and specific you can be, the better engagement and better memory you can create with your audience. So what we suggest is that, if possible, don't just talk about British film, but feel free to talk about British drama, British psychological thriller, and so on and so forth, because this already captivates the brain and the mind and the heart of your consumers. So that's number 3. Number 4 is do not try to impress. When it comes to going to the cinema, perhaps unsurprisingly, the key driver is to get an immersive experience. However, what we have found was that even though almost each participant was using the word immersive and immersive experience, when we challenged them, or when we prompted about the actual meaning or content of the word immersive, what we saw was a lack of actual content, a lack of actual meaning. And that's, an easy win for you, because the way you can engage people and the way you can encourage them to go to the cinema is mention the plush seats, is to mention the red velvet, is to mention the fact that you can get amazing wine or cheap popcorn, or that your seat can actually be kicked by someone behind you, because this is all part of the immersive experience, obviously apart from the big screen and the great audiovisual experience. If you want to further engage them, then remind them that going to the cinema is an event. It's something to look forward to when you're bored with your life, or at least with your week. You can also talk about the fact that if you go to the cinema, it can be a nostalgic experience, because by going to the cinema and watching a black and white movie, you might recall the times with your late grandfather, and it brings back nice memories of your grandfather who is no longer with you. And funnily enough, the fact that you remind them, you might choose to remind them of some people kicking the back of your seat, it can actually be a good experience, because, as I mentioned, we had Sophie, the 38-year-old lady who happens to be single. She doesn't spend an awful lot of time interacting with people. So, strangely enough, the fact that there are people kicking her seat is actually a way of feeling, the human interaction and feeling some emotion, which might not be the most pleasant one. So there you go, encouraging going to the cinema. It's all boiling down to not trying to impress people. In terms of visual entertainment, what we also wanted to do is basically understand a little bit about playing video games. And when it comes to video games, our suggestion to you, based on our finding, is that you should be welcoming the new Steven Spielbergs, because one of the key drivers of playing video games is, again, this immersive experience. And yes, some people might be using this particular expression, but what most of them would be telling you, actually some of the people that you've seen before, he was telling us that when he plays a video game, he feels that he's directing a blockbuster movie. And some other lady told us that it's amazing to be playing a video game because she feels in control. And she's got children, and of course, sometimes during her everyday life, it's not easy to feel in control. But playing a video game gives her this experience of being in control, directing a top money movie or even a small budget movie, and creating their own universe, feeling this sort of creative vein coming to life. Of course, there are other ways you can talk to playing video games to your customers without making them feel stigmatized, which of course is still a little bit there. As one of the ladies mentioned, and I think we didn't listen to that soundbite because of course then we would be here until the afternoon, but what she also mentioned or alluded to was the fact that playing video games is basically a way to mental health. What she was telling us, and she's much, much more enjoyable to listen to, at least in this regard, was that during work she has to play these simple YouTube video games in order to get rid of her boredom and in order to feel sane. You know, for some people it's about running, and for other people it's really about playing video games. And I'm not just talking about the World of Warcraft or, you know, one of those really fancy and elaborate video games. It can be your simple Candy Crush or any of those types of exercises. So to wrap up, again, 5 key points to you. One of them is around complicating things to simplify decision making, falling back on this pyramid of needs, and then be bold with Britishness, but don't try to impress when it comes to encouraging cinema visitation, and also welcome the new Spielbergs. And if I was asked, you know, what the key takeout is, basically, apart from these 5 areas that I have just shared with you, I would tell you that it's the diversity, and it's the diversity of people and diversity of opinions which really reminded us not to be complacent, which hopefully we are not, but never lean back and think that we know everything about the consumer, their decision making, their feelings and emotions. Because for some people, as it turned out, one of the greatest achievements in life is to have locked up Jeffrey Archer, apart from reading his books. And he was one of our participants. And this is something that we never have been able to guess or never have been able to hypothesize. And it was also intriguing to understand that for some people, culture means going to the cinema and watching a black and white movie. But for other people, culture means just walking your dog.